Our very first speaker of today is kind of an expert when it comes to challenge. His big dream since he was 20 years old was to become a CEO of a big car company. 1.5 years ago, the dream came true. But despite the fact that this company produces some of the most beautiful cars in the world, and Mr. Bond himself prefers this brand over any other brand, it has been no easy task. He will now share his insight on the next 12. Please welcome the CEO of Aston Martin, Mr. Palmer, Andy Palmer. So, Mr. Palmer, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Wow, that's a long walk. I think I was in Sweden. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andy Palmer. I'm the warm-up comedian for Peter and Brian. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Aston Martin. Clearly, the cars are prettier than the CEO. Aston Martin is undeniably a company that is centered in luxury. I would argue that we're a luxury company first and a car company second, and our aspiration in everything that we do is to make the most beautiful cars in the world. The car that you saw there is the long-awaited DB11, replacing the DB9, and it's on your streets, hopefully in Denmark, in September of this year. I don't know whether you know, but Aston Martin is an independent car company. We don't belong to any major groups. We're not part of BMW, we're not part of Volkswagen, we're not part of Fiat. We're totally independent, owned by private equity. We're the, if you will, the remnants of the British automotive industry. Everything else lies in foreign hands, either owned by the Indians or the Germans or whoever else. It's my intention to keep us where we are, independent, not owned by anybody else. But we have some challenges. We have some challenges technologically, because of the cost of developing a car is enormously expensive. If you ask me to put a price on the development of a new car, it's about $1 billion. And that's a lot of money for a small car company. We're independent. We don't have the big group to fall back on, so we have to find our way of developing that technology and keeping ourselves relevant and independent and handmade. And next time you're out buying your other luxury cars or sports cars, ask them just how handmade it is. Because an Aston Martin only has one robot in the entire factory. Everything else is made by hand. That robot, by the way, puts the glue on the aluminium to bond it together because it's really important from a crashworthiness point of view. That one robot, of course, is naturally called James Bonder. History of the company. In 103 years that we've been around, we've only made less than 80,000 cars in 103 years, about the same that Toyota makes in a week. Only around half actually left the UK, so the majority of those cars, those classic cars, are actually still in the UK. Only around 2,000 of those cars actually went to the so-called BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So we really haven't explored that untapped potential market. And rather shockingly, only 3,500 of those 80,000 cars were sold to women. Great opportunity for us to make cars that appeal more to women. But having established perhaps the coolest car company in the world, and we've been voted 5 times as the coolest company in the world, I believe today we're in second place behind some company called Apple. I'm not sure who they are and what they do, but it's not bad to be in second. I prefer to be in first. But what marks this mark is that whilst we make, I would argue, the most beautiful cars in the world, fundamentally, we've never been profitable. And the difference between our first century, which was the development of those beautiful cars, that beautiful brand, and as we move into the second century, is that we have to make sure that the balance sheet lives up to the reputation of the brand. And that's why I joined the company. That said, and as we've said already, as Lillian said already, we struggle to understand what the trends of the market might be even in 12 days' times. But we have to try to have an understanding of what's going on in our industry. And this is my take. Naturally, I'm not very bright, so I need to do things in circles, triangles, and crosses. But this tries to predict how the car industry will change between now and 2050. The most important point, I guess, is that today about 50% of the world's population lives in a city, and that will increase to around 70%. At the same time, the auto industry today sells about 84 million cars per year. That's going to massively increase to around 200 million cars per year in the same timescale. So more cars sold per year crammed into the cities, the air quality is going to be awful, the congestion is going to be awful, and that starts to create social tensions. Beyond that, we have to be aware of the changing customer requirements, and I've written them down here. We have the so-called Gen Z, the millennials, who have, of course, different expectations of their car, or perhaps they don't even expect to drive a car at all. We have the seniors. Interesting fact are that a 70-year-old today walks at the same speed as a 60-year-old 10 years ago. In other words, the advances in medical side of our life is advancing so quickly that we're living longer, and we expect to have our independence longer. What does that mean? We expect to be able to drive a car longer. What does that mean? Well, there's a market automatically for the autonomous car. And finally, the empowered female. It's interesting, I told you that only a small proportion of people, a small proportion of women buy our cars today, about 4%, but women are present in about 70% of the transactions that we make. So the power of the purse is incredibly important. Those are the social pressures. On the technical side, we undoubtedly have the move of technology pushing towards zero emissions, the connected car, and the autonomous car. And you can see there, a circle, by the way, means that there's a full correlation, a triangle, there's a partial correlation, and a cross, almost no correlation. So it's changing. What's also changing is where the money is made in our industry. In the middle, the mass market, it's going to be increasingly hard to differentiate yourself. The car becomes more of a commodity. And I would argue that the place to be in the car industry right now is either at the bottom end, selling entry cars, or at the top end, producing bespoke, beautiful cars for those people that can afford them. And this slide speaks a little bit to that luxury market. The fact that it's growing. There are more and more high net worth individuals in the world. We describe high net worth as somebody that has at least $1 million of disposable savings. So they've got £1 million that they can free to do anything that they like with. Nice position to be in. If there's anybody in that category in this room, please see me afterwards. What's interesting is that category is growing and outpacing the growth of the industry in general, and outpacing the growth of global GDP. You see that between 2013 and 2014, it grew by 10%. But what's also interesting is that the location of those individuals has changed dramatically. It's moved east. So for us as a car company that traditionally sold beautiful cars in the United Kingdom, we have to recognize that we have to move east, to Denmark, of course, or in fact, to China and the emerging nations in Southeast Asia, which means that we need to understand our customer more, and that's what drives, for example, the need for a luxury SUV, because if you go to China, basically everybody drives SUVs. What's considered cool as a car isn't a three-box sedan. The sports car market isn't yet mature, and the market that we have to appeal to is that SUV market, which is why in 2019 we will offer what we call a crossover, the DBX. So our plan, how do we go from a company that fundamentally never made money to a company that will be extraordinarily profitable? We go through what we call our second century plan. Our second century plan is controlled by something we call Hoshinkanri, Japanese, translates into policy deployment, and it's broken into 3 timelines. The first one being stabilization, the second one being core strengthening, and the third one being portfolio expansion. Right now we're in the stabilization. We don't have any new cars. The first new car is the DB11 that you saw on the video, and it comes out in September. So at the moment we have to work with what we have, which is beautiful cars that are getting a little aged. So we have to revive them and renew them. And I'm pleased to say in my first year of tenure in the company, with a car set that is about 12 years old, and after years of declining volume, we managed last year to increase our volume by 11%. Hopefully that translates onto the bottom line. So we also do some interesting cars like the Vulcan, the car that you saw, the sports car you saw on the program, and the GT12. GT12, 100 units, one-offs, if you will, that sold out before we even launched the car. So through stabilization, get the company fit. Get the company ready for massive expansion. Get the company to understand that you don't just do one car at a time. You have to be capable of spitting and chewing at the same time and doing 4 cars at the same time. And then that moves us into this second part, which is the core strengthening, which means that we replace every single sports car in our range. Start with the DB11, then the Vantage, then the Vanquish. That starts to put us into a position of decent profitability. It makes us look as a company a little bit like Ferrari. They make little red cars, you don't need to know about them. If you're not in the market then for a sports car, then, and you're one of those millennials, or what the Chinese call 80后, a little bit of Chinese there, then we move to offer the first crossover, the car that sits in the SUV segment and opens us out to a different audience. Opens us out to that audience today, which we've only sold 2,000 cars to. Opens us up to the potential of more female customers, which we've only sold 3,500. So allows us that expansion. And beyond that, we relaunch the Lagonda. and that takes us through to about 2021, when we seek our next plan, which of course is world domination. We do that, as I mentioned, using a tool which is Hoshin Kanri. For more details, read my book. No, I'm just joking, I don't have a book. Which is a way of deploying the policy, and the policy is basically very boring. It's all financial stuff, EBITDA, EBIT, all of that stuff that the accountants love. And it takes it through 6 pillars, and these are the 6 pillars. So number 1, inspiring customer-focused luxury products. Number 2, strengthening our global brand and sales power. Number 3, world-class processes. Number 4, quality, etc., etc., etc. And to that, we add tactics. I'll give you an example here. This is taken from the Hoshin Kanri. And you see the policy. It's a target in a particular year for EBITDA. The strategy number 5, is the development of passionate and professional people within the company. You see that it's owned by a gentleman called Michael Kerr, head of HR. The tactic is the development and the promotion of a certain mindset and behavior. We break that down into an execution plan, which is leadership effectiveness, which has a KPI. In this case, it's a retention of people. And then the most important point, we have a mathematical correlation. We turn that into something that the balance sheet would understand. Pounds, not euros. That's my bit of controversy. And that adds into the EBITDA column, and you add up all of the tactics, and down at the bottom, you check whether that equals the policy, and if it doesn't, you go around what the Japanese call Kaizen, and you go round and around and around, and eventually you evolve your tactics towards your execution plan, your strategies, and your policy. And that's how we're running the company. If I take that a little further on the leadership, you saw that the tactic was about leadership effectiveness. Here we break that down into the type of things that we're doing. And you see, for example, teaching the team to communicate a compelling vision. I'm still learning. Challenge the business to stretch itself. You know, a business that's got used to losing money has to exercise itself, get fit, that's not me, get fit to make sure that it's capable of making a profit. Inspire and foster the required culture. Monitor and manage the business performance. Develop the organization's capabilities. And these are the things that we're working with the team now to make sure in that particular work stream that we're capable of being a sustainable luxury company for the second century. How does that work for my next 12? Well, in my next 12 days, I'm working with the leadership team to prepare for that transformation. In the next 12 months, we're embedding the formal process of Hoshin Kanri. They made me change the Japanese into English, so we call it Plus Alpha. So we're working on getting that embedded within the company to make sure we're fit for the next 12 years, which is, as I mentioned, world domination, and delivering the transformation of our second century. A second century which is marked by the delivery to market of beautiful cars aimed at particular customers, but reflected on an extremely strong balance sheet. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andy. You have a seat.
Thank you.
The last chair is for you. I'm not used to working and walking in high heels, so it might take a while before I get there.
I can teach you.
So welcome to Copenhagen.
Thank you. First time here.
Yes, it's wonderful to have you here, and we enjoy your cars outside.
Thank you.
Beautiful, something to look at for the break. Andy, when I did my research, I read an interview shortly after you took the job, and you were asked, how would you describe the business model of Aston Martin? And you said, 102 years of losing money. I'm just wondering, were you as blunt when you were interviewed for the position?
Oh, I was pretty blunt. I am pretty blunt. Look, we have to accept that the last 100 years, or the first 100 years, was marked by a broken business model. when you've worked in a company, and most of our employees had their parents working at the company and even their grandparents. It's that kind of cottage industry. And they've been brought up on the belief that success is only one of creating beautiful cars and a beautiful brand, all of which is to be applauded. But to change that, you've got to send a shock. And there's perhaps nothing more shocking than the CEO standing in public and say, that business model was broken, and we've got to change it.
Yes, and if we look at what you actually overtook at the time, let's see at Aston Martin pre-taxes losses. In 13, it was 25 million pounds, 14, 72 million pounds. I believe the numbers for this year, for 2015, are coming out this April.
Yes, they are.
How do they look?
Did you look at Christmas presents before you opened, before Christmas Day?
I might. No, of course not.
Well, look, very clearly, I'm not allowed to divulge company results before they come out. However, very clearly, our retail rate and our wholesale rate increased, which is a remarkable achievement given where we were. So we increased our retail rate by 11%. More importantly, we increased our wholesale rate at a greater percentage. What does that do? It destocks. It takes cars out of the system, and it starts, therefore, to do all sorts of good things, not least the cars that come to the dealers are younger. Normally, they're ordered by the customer, and as a consequence, your residual value goes up. So undoubtedly, in a turnaround situation, the things that you have to do that are difficult, things that you have to correct from the past, and one of those is basically getting stock out of the system. And if there's one thing that Japan taught me, is basically you don't have stock. Basically, you work on a lean model.
So we have to wait a bit for the numbers, I hear. But
not very long.
Not very long.
Very soon.
But just tell us how. I know this has been your dream since you were 20, becoming CEO, and especially for Aston Martin. But has the task been more difficult than you expected?
Yes. Yes.
How come?
The part of running a car company. I would say that I've trained my career. I left school at 16, what the Americans call a dropout, what my father called a dropout. But I've been exercising how to make cars from the very start of my career, and I think I'm reasonably competent at doing that. Taking on something as cherished as the Aston Martin brand, even though I went to school 5 miles off from where the factory is, I hadn't fully appreciated just how loved it is and how many opinions people have about it, and how difficult it is to change a culture. Of all of those 6 strategies I talked about, the development of passionate and professional people is the most difficult, because that talks around changing a mindset that's been created over a period of 103 years, and even talking, even showing to your first line staff the financial performance of the company, which was the first time it had happened. For the majority of the people to hear that they weren't profitable and weren't successful is shocking, and it takes a long time to turn that culture around. 18 months so far.
Yes, and before we talk more about your turnaround plans and your strategy for the future, you just touched upon the cherished brand, Aston Martin, and I'd just like to look at one of your biggest assets. Let's just have a look. This was, of course, Mr. 007, and I believe this was the DB10.
That was a DB10.
Yeah,
and that
prior
driving,
for the DB11, yes.
You probably don't know that I'm his body double.
Oh, really? Oh, you do that on the side? Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay. Magnificent. Didn't know. But beside that fact, what does James Bond mean to Aston Martin?
It's a huge asset. And that's the reason that we created the DB10. The DB10 is a car made uniquely for Bond. We only made 10 of them. We only ever will make 10 of them. He managed to put 2 of them in the Tiber, which is a bit of a pisser. But I mean, you know, people talk about celebrity endorsement. There's no better celebrity endorsement than Bond, because you always know what he's going to do. You know, he's athletic, he's good looking, he dresses well, he enjoys luxury, he's a little bit naughty. That's Aston. so you know, that's very good. The important thing for us is that we can't use Bond as a crutch. I mean, it can't be the only thing that we do. It helps us to communicate the upper funnel of the company in terms of aided awareness. If you go to China and you ask people, have you heard of Aston Martin? Their response will be James Bond.
Yes.
We have to go deeper than that. I mean, we have to be able to say, do you know Aston is the only British car company? Do you know that all of those cars are handmade and that no other car company beyond some really, really, you know, one-offs makes cars by hand? Did you know that all of the leather in the car is made from Scottish hides? Did you know that the badge on the front of the car is handmade in the Birmingham jewelry quarter? Those are the stories that we have to get across, in addition to the fact that, you know, James Bond has the best taste in the world in cars and girls, and he happens to drive one of our cars. So it's great, but we need more.
So he kind of raises global awareness, but you can say Aston Martin in many ways are very linked to the 007. Aston Martin has gone bankrupt for 7 times. But still, Aston Martin survived, so does Bond. I'm just thinking, does the same go for chief executives?
We've had a lot of chief executives. Look, in my mind, the chief executives have often been the owners of the company. And if I try to make a diagnostic of the past business model, the owners have tended to buy the company for vanity. It's for the vanity of the owner, the vanity of the chief executive. And in doing so, that they come in and they've created, you know, the next DB5, or they've created the next Vantage V8, or the next DB9. They've come in and they funded one car. And they funded that one car, and they haven't thought beyond that one car, the funding for the next car, the next car, and the next car. And what an auto company needs is tempo. It needs a continuum of new cars, new stories, and new customers. And what's happened is they come in, they put the money on the new car, we've made the new car, it's created lots of buzz, it's sold for a few years, there's been no updates to the car, nothing to follow. And in consequence, the company never created enough profit and therefore cash to fund the next car. In consequence, it went bankrupt, or it had to find a new owner. And what I think, I'm clearly not a rich guy, and I'm clearly not here for vanity. I would say, for me, it's a calling, it's a vocation. I've come back to, I hope, save the last British car company, because I'm a Brit and I grew up 5 miles from that company. And that vocation is to make the car company sustainable. And that means when I came into the company, I made sure that I had the authority to make the next 7 cars with funding for the next 4. So I have the money in the bank to do the DB11, the Vantage, the Vanquish, and the DBX. And I know at the end of that I'll have sufficient money from operations, working capital, to be able to fund the next car, the next car, the next car, and the next car. And that's the change in history. That's what allows me to sit here confidently to say we can make the 2nd century different, excuse me, to the 1st century.
But as you just described, expectations are high also to you as CEO. And I know that barely 6 months after you accepted the job, you gave a speech that you described as the most important speech of your career. This was at the, I think, Geneva Motor Show in March 2015. Why was this so pivotal?
When I joined the company, I took the Geneva show, which in my opinion, and I think most people's opinion, is the most important motor show in the calendar globally. And in my mind, if I didn't have the business plan, and I didn't have the money, and I didn't have the ability to transmit the vision of where the company wanted to go, within that period, which was a period of 6 months, then I would have failed and the job was hopeless. I commissioned the DBX the fourth day in the company. So this is the crossover. This is the car that basically I think will completely transform the business model. With the intention of asking Marek Reichman, our Chief Creative Officer, to have that car ready as a show car at Geneva. I created a business plan from the moment that I joined the company, and I had it approved at our board of directors at the end of January. It required, in addition to the £50 million of cash that the private equity had already put in, it required a further 500 million plus 200 million. And we went out to the markets and we managed to get that money. And therefore, standing there was basically the most important speech, because what it said was, this is the first hurdle. You know, the plan is only 5% of the story, but that first 5% was absolutely important, because that picture that I showed you earlier, behind me in that picture, you had representatives of the directors, representatives of the employees, representatives of the union, representatives of the shareholder, and representatives of the supplier.
So you're in this together. So that was the signal.
It was all about signaling.
Yes.
It's all about symbolism, and that symbolism is important, as we know.
So when you took the job, you described the old business model as 102 years of losing money. If you, in short words, should describe the new business model, what would that be?
Not losing money. No, I want, look, I want, I mean, you get, not losing money is the output of doing a good job, and the company doing a good job.
It's going to take a while before you not lose money, don't you think?
No, it won't take so long.
Okay, sounds good. You look at the smile.
I may need my PR guy to do some cleanup after this. Look, the brand is great. I mean, you saw the cars outside. They're to die for.
Yes, absolutely.
It's very different from most car companies, which is capable of making money because it makes a lot of cars, but has a crap brand. And basically is constantly worrying about how it takes its variable incentives off the car. I don't have to put incentives on the car. I'm in a really privileged position that I've got a great brand, and all I need to do is build a business model around it. It's all about the new cars.
It's all about the new cars. And I'd just like to touch upon about the future, because meanwhile, rivals are moving in. We have Tesla with its premium electric vehicles, Google with its self-driving cars. You touched upon that in your presentation. And Apple with something very secret but surely significant. They're not in your league, but still, these challenges that are ahead.
I'm going to tweet that.
What impact?
Apple is not in our league. Did you get that, Simon? Out on a tweet.
Well, maybe I have a preferable taste. I'll keep that to myself. But still, these kind of changes, how will that affect the car industry?
They will. I mean, very clearly that the auto industry will change. I actually would say that we're at the biggest inflection point in the auto industry's history in 125 years. 125 years ago, we moved from horses to cars. I would say, with the new players coming in, by the way, there's a whole list of others, and people forget the Chinese. Faraday Future, for example. So there is a big change. The traditional model is going to be challenged. Undoubtedly, things like autonomous driving. These are not pilotless, by the way. You'll still need to sit in the car. But autonomous driving is really around the corner, 2020, for full autonomy. What that's going to do, particularly with those new players, it's going to turn that mass market much more into a commodity. I mean, look, if this is a car that you just jump in, you push a button, and it fundamentally takes you from A to B, you could argue it really doesn't matter what the brand is. I mean, if they all do them competently, it's like a fridge. What does that mean? It means it's extraordinarily hard to make money in the middle, in that area, because you end up competing on, do you have the right technology? Yes. Does the car look okay? Yes. Have you got a local dealer? Yes. Therefore, let's discuss price. And it becomes really hard to make money there. Where the money will be made is a little bit at the bottom, those real entry cars into those emerging markets, and at the top end. And that's why within the plan, I'm never going to make, with Aston, I'm never going to make more than 7,000 sports cars a year. I'm never going to make more than 7,000 Lagondas and crossovers a year. Why? Because I want to stay in that top market where people that don't want just a commodity, people that want to say something about themselves and have the money to do that, people that have great taste, understand art, perhaps, understand why you'd buy a Birkin handbag, understand and love craftsmanship, and want something personal, they're going to pay for that.
But can you transform that to other lines of businesses? Because we just heard about how you face the challenge at Aston Martin for the next 12 years. But from one CEO to all these CEOs, what do you think will be the most important thing to be aware of for the next 12 months?
Oh, the world is changing so quickly. So I think, a lot of it is about, you have your plan, but make sure that the plan is robust for change. From my perspective, the most important point is the strength of the brand, because it's the brand that will ultimately save you. But of course, you need to run whatever you want to call them, Monte Carlo scenarios. That plan, that Hoshin Kanri that I showed you, that has within it a whole series of what could happen. Britex.
Yes.
What happens if the UK comes out of the EU? No one knows.
Yes.
But at least the business plan needs to test the robustness of what happens if there's tariff barriers coming into Europe, one way and the other. What happens if the Chinese market continues to go soft? What happens if Donald Trump wins the election? Maybe that's a flight of fancy. You have to do that. You have to do that because, as you rightly introduced, we don't know what's happening in 12 days, let alone in 12 months.
We're running a bit out of time, but I have a few points I need to share with you because speaking about the future and speaking about change, I'd just like to show the audience what you have in store at Aston Martin for the future. This March, Aston Martin announced a new venture with the Red Bull Formula One racing team. You will create a new hypercar for 2018, so 007 is heading off for Monaco. This sounds like a sound strategic move, but how would that, let's say, deliver value?
It creates a halo car, and for a company that's selling dreams, it's always good to have a halo. Lots of people will tell me about, and me too, to be frank, about when they were 13 years old, the poster that they had in their bedroom, and it might have been an Aston Martin Vantage, or it might have been a Testarossa. In my case, it was Debbie Harry. But you have to create something that dreams are made of, and the question for a lot of luxury car companies now is, are we making cars that are to die for, that you spend your whole life dreaming about? And what I wanted to do was to create a whole new range for Aston Martin that basically is creating dreams for 13-year-olds. And to do that, who better to go to than the world's greatest aero designer, Adrian Newey, who is the most successful Formula One car designer in the world ever. He works for Red Bull, and say, look, you come and work with Marek Reichman and our Q Special Operations team and create the most stunning car in history. Ultimately, you'll judge whether we succeed or not. But the mandate is to do that. Create a car that, on the right tyres, in the right conditions, can be driven around Silverstone faster than a Formula One car. Something that basically you'll drool over, not just today, but you'll drool over in 50 years' time. And that's the mandate. So that's why that car that exists. And that, almost by coincidence, gives us the opportunity to be the innovation partner with Red Bull and go Formula One racing, which doesn't harm the brand either. So,
yes.
In our first two races, as innovation partner, Red Bull came fourth in both races. Prefer that it was first, but fourth is not bad.
That's not bad. You said that world domination is the dream in 12 years' time. Well, if we put on, let's say, realistic glasses, where do you see Aston Martin in 12 years' time?
the pride of Great Britain, simply put. I mean, frankly, controversially, we screwed up our car industry. I mean, basically, if you think back to British Leyland, it was at one moment it was the biggest car company in the world, and now basically what's left is foreign owned, which is not bad, and you know it flourishes under foreign ownership. But Aston Martin is what's left, and what I'd like, I think you know, the Brits have given something to the car industry, something important. And if you think about what happens, is the world a better place if Aston Martin isn't there? And I think the answer to that is no. We make beautiful cars uncompromisingly. We make hand-built cars. We keep that craftsmanship of making cars alive. Go any other factory, any other car factory in the world, and you'll see clinical excellence made by robots. And that if you want, cottage industry of hand-sewing seats, putting cars together, exists in a little place in Gaydon called Aston Martin. And I want to turn that into something that's successful, so you know, my kids and my grandkids can look back and say, that's how real cars are made, and we're proud that they're made in Great Britain.
I like that vision. Before we thank you for your insight here today, I'd like to challenge you a bit. I have 3 pictures here, and I'd like to ask you, as a fan of James Bond and of Aston Martin, can you tell us what is the odd one out here? We have Goldfinger, we have the man with the golden gun, and then we have GoldenEye. Which one is the odd one out?
One of them didn't have an Aston Martin in it.
That's true.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yes, very good. It was the man with the golden gun. It did not feature an Aston Martin. And in fact, I did my research. Roger Moore, he did 7 movies, and he never drove an Aston Martin.
What an idiot.
Is he your favorite Bond?
Was he Bond?
Oh. So today we leave the audience with 2 snap answers in regards of what is the best career advice you've ever received?
Two things, I think. One was probably from my dad. I told you I dropped out when I was 16, and I dropped out because I wanted to go into the car industry, and that's all I wanted to do. And basically, his best advice, I think, was just follow your dream. The other is much more practical. I remember being with a really good negotiator, and I said, "What's the best advice you can give me when you're negotiating a contract or negotiating a joint venture?" And he said, "Silence." He said, "People feel the need to fill in the silence. So if you're in a negotiation and you put your proposal and you have the discussion, and then you fall silent, the guy on the other side of the table will feel the need to fill in. And when he fills in, he's almost certainly compromising his position." So I'm not going to negotiate with anybody out there anymore, since you know the secret. But that was probably a piece of very useful advice, and very useful when negotiating with Chinese and different cultures.
So maybe you already answered my second question, because I'm going to ask, what is the best advice you'll give to your fellow audience today?
Buy an Aston.
That's a good one.
I gave a little hint on what I call Hoshin Kanri. Throughout my career, whether it was simply rebuilding the light commercial vehicle business in Nissan, or whether it's the transformation in Aston Martin, what I've always found is that communicating a clear vision, which allows you to plot on a piece of paper the things that you do and how they all connect together. So, for example, how Formula One racing helps to create a sustainable car company. The Hoshin, the logic of the Hoshin, makes it very simple for people to understand, number one, what you're doing, and number two, what their role is within the midterm plan. So I find Hoshin Kanri extremely useful. I think it works in almost every context, and it's my gift to you today.
Andy Palmer, thank you for your gift, and it's been a pleasure, and good luck on your vision. Andy Palmer.
Thank you.